right, good morning, everyone. Community and Economic Development Committee,
I can bring my volleyball can to the range. Shoot 16 on
where we
volleyball.
will not be talking about Dick's gun.
I'm sorry. The chief said we can bring what we want. I'm telling Amy, I've got a volleyball can on the range. Let's see if the chief really meant that.
Okay, neither is that. Okay, I'm
It's in
John
my
Weddleton.
garage. It's in my garage. Dick training.
Pete Peterson.
I had a clue with that. Interesting.
Roy Monday, West Concord.
Jed Smith, Anco. Tom Dreher, S4 Group.
Colin Howard, Egan Joint.
Chris Escher, RC Kinderbugs.
Scott Westover, SW Investments.
Ian Yoon at Honolulu. Shanna at JDW Council.
Marion Swanson, Hollywood. Michaela Steele, Hollywood.
Ryan Yell, Planning Department.
Dave Whitfield, Planning Department.
Chris Schutte, Office of Economic Community Development.
Amy Dombrowski, all morning.
We didn't go this time.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Sharon Ferguson, Planning.
Okay, well, thanks, everyone. So first up is Hollyweed, and typically what we've done is, so if the applicants and representatives could go ahead and sit up here and participate in it. If you haven't been to these before, generally we'll have a discussion amongst the assembly members, and if you're an applicant, you have something to say, or even if you're in the audience, kind of wave, and I'll try to call on you. So usually you'll have a chance to speak, but try not to just jump in, wave, or point at it. So. Okay, so this one is Sharon. We'll go first. I'm sorry, man. You want to go through the licensing?
So this is Hollywood's retail, and the licensing requirements were all addressed in their operating plan. There wasn't any taxes, fees, or fines down due. They have 2 licenses applied for so far, but they potentially will have a third. So they'll have all 3 of those on their diagram. There was no recommended extra conditions on the license.
All right, thank you. And Sharon?
Yes, they are here, the Hollywood 97 is here for their retail sales establishment permit. They are located on East 88th Avenue in an I-1 zoning district. They are surrounded by other I-1 zoning districts. They are going to be located in an existing building. The existing building is 8,191 square feet. The retail portion of it will occupy 1,794 square feet. As Mandy was saying, they plan to have a manufacturing facility at this location, as well as a cultivation facility in the future. Meets all the dimensional standards. It meets the intent of the district-specific standards. Really, everything is met. The site is served by on-site well water, but they have public sewer. They have access to People Mover Bus Route 55. And there weren't any conditions other than our boilerplate conditions we typically have.
Thoughts of assembly members?
Oh, yeah.
So, talk to me, Sharon, about how exactly we measured the separation distance on this one. I had been contacted prior to this application, when the property was potentially being sold or leased or whatever it was. And I was told, the previous owner specifically said you can't put a marijuana facility here because it's too close to a child care center. And, there was a lot of discussion, and I was told by the previous owner that they were gonna take the gamble on it anyway. So, you know, this is one, frankly, when we're talking about basically property to property, and we're looking right there at a child care center, I'm gonna be really critical on how you guys measure it.
Mhm. If you look about, it's Exhibit 1, it's about, I don't know, midway in your pack, a little bit closer to the front. It's, I don't have a page number on it.
Page 28.
28. And it shows, and it's stamped by a surveyor, and it shows the distance coming out the front door, going down the property line, and then going down Arlene Street to the child care center that you mentioned. And they have a distance of 567 feet.
Okay, so what we're saying, the way I'm reading this is they walk straight out the door, they walk straight down the property line, and then they go this way.
Go down the street, yes.
Okay, how realistic is this? There's a stop sign like right here, right? Is there a fence that blocks them from actually just walking straight out the door, turning left and going down?
Yes, there is a fence.
Is it in the right of way?
I don't believe so, no. I think it's on their property line.
Because the last picture I saw, there was a stop sign right there, and it looked like the fence was right there, which would have been in the right of way. I wanna know for sure.
According to the survey, it looks like it's right on the property line. If you see the XX there, that's the fence line, and it looks like the two little squares that indicate the extension of the fence.
Okay, so let me show you what I'm looking at. So here's the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're showing me a line that goes like this.
Mm-hmm.
The fence is over here.
There's a fence right here.
And this is the stop sign right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do they have a fence running right against the road?
It's,
Is there a sidewalk there?
there's no sidewalk there, no. But so they're gonna come out this way, walk around down this way, and there is a fence right here.
Yeah, so, Sharon, I think what Amy's saying is they went straight out the door to our line. Would that make it less than 500 feet?
And there was another similar to that came earlier, but there was still, it was, I think, around 520 feet if you counted it without that fence, that section. So it was still over 500.
Is that your point, Amy?
Yeah, that's what I was asking, because, you know, I'll just be very candid, the previous owner was very skeptical and said, listen, they're building this shabby little fence to make it kind of this like, oh, they're gonna get an extra 10 feet this way, now you gotta go this way. And frankly, I'm not interested in seeing people get creative just to get around the rules.
I understand, yeah. In the earlier version I saw without that, and I was just looking for it, I don't have it, but it was still over 500 feet. But I think they put the little section just to make it a little bit further. People would have to walk a little bit further, crazy distance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the fence was not there before, or there was a fence, and this is a new fence, or?
There was an existing fence there. There's a 6-foot chain link fence, and then they added to that fence. I think with this, am I correct?
There was a fence that was in the right of way. You're right about that, and so we had to remove it because it was in the right of way. So your recollection is correct, and so, yeah, this is one that was tight. You know, these guys hired me after the building was purchased, but, you know, after we started really digging into it, it does meet the separation distance requirement, because that was my first, you know, concern too. So even without the fence, you know, because I didn't want to make it look like we were kind of skirting the rules, we made sure that it was just barely, it would make it.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest concerns I have is, there comes a point where, I mean, literally you stand out, and like I said, the previous owner flat out said, right there is a daycare facility. I mean, it's right there. And, you know, 500 feet is 500 feet, which, you know, in my view is still too close, but at what point did you say, is there a public concern? Did you guys talk to the child care facility?
I think we sent them notices and they didn't come to the community council meeting. This is the same daycare that we've seen show up. Remember at that one on Minnesota?
Yeah.
It's the same owners, I believe. But they didn't come to the community council meeting, and, you know, I've emailed them before, not on this case, but another case, but never heard back, because I wanted their input on a sign, you know, but they didn't get back, so.
Anything else?
So parking is adequate?
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you.
I know, just a small point, I think in the staff packet, it said open 9 AM to midnight, 7 days. I don't know if that meant the whole, when everything's done, we have your manufacturing, because then on page 13, it says 10 AM to 9 PM, Monday through Saturday. And I don't really carry the way, I just don't want to have something.
That's just referring to the retail, not the whole facility, but,
The retail will open at 10 a.m. and close at 9 p.m.
And would you, when you fully blown out, you do the 9 AM to?
well, somebody will be in there because of the way that the facility has to be managed. When we get cultivation in there and manufacturing, more particularly for cultivation, somebody will be in there a little bit longer.
Okay, and then, just a little curious, if you have, I guess there's a snow, you have just enough parking, so snow store, there's no snow storage space, so if there's 3 inches of accumulation, you'll plow it and within 24 hours dispose of it somewhere. Is that realistic? I mean, if you have big snow, could you get someone to haul away your snow in 24 hours?
Anchorage, Alaska, I think we can find some people in the business of hauling snow.
Maybe.
I mean, this is the Muni's, form for a snow removal agreement, so that's what we went with.
Yeah, good luck. Maybe it'll work. I just, in my experience, sometimes all those haulers are busy hauling snow and you will get it done.
Well, if we can't figure it out and it becomes an issue, we'll come back and try to modify it. Because there is provision 4.0, we can come back and try to get a modification.
Well, what is the rule, Sharon, though? I mean, if you don't have snow storage, it's not like, this seems particularly aggressive.
Well, it says within their agreement that they are supposed to haul it within 24 hours of accumulation of 3 inches or more, as you just stated. I would have to check with the people who issue these agreements to see if they have any idea of how well this is working. If we have anyone that's going to have to check to see if businesses whom we have these agreements with are actually hauling snow within 24 hours. But I would guess, I mean, it only hurts the business owner if they're not able to remove the snow, within 24 hours or a reasonable time period. It only, there's no benefit to extending it. I would assume they're trying to get the snow out and removed as quickly as they can. But I can, just for future reference, find out if we have any information on, after we issue these, how well it's working or not. I don't know, I can ask if there have been any complaints that we've received from people calling in about businesses who, still have snow there after 24 hours. But it would be complaint driven, that's the only way we get any information on the subject.
Is this right down from the car wash?
Yeah, it's just back of the car wash.
See, what do you do about the runoff of the car wash? It hits all on straight, that most of the winter time, it's an ice rink.
I couldn't tell you, I'd have to talk to street maintenance if it's running out onto the street. There is a slight slope from that business, I did notice, from their parking lot down to the street. So I'm sure it is gathering if they're, but it's just the water, I'm assuming, that's on the cars as they're pulling out, that's still dripping off the
Right,
car.
it freezes up every winter.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I know the area.
I live nearby. Anything else?
Well, I'm gonna say one thing. The biggest challenge I have with this application is frankly the location. It's an I-1, totally, it's one of the best places to put it, no question about it. But I am finding myself struggling with this one simply because I recognize, and I'll just say it, the manipulation that happened when the law was passed to change the rules for the municipality of Anchorage, but I think it's imperative that we have consistency in law when we are evaluating these applications. But we also have to measure the impact to the community and the overarching need to protect what I believe are spheres of influences or the whole purpose of protected land use. And in this particular location, I've actually driven down there, I've looked at the location, I've looked at Google Earth, I've looked at the maps, and I'm still of the mind that I believe the easiest way to measure these things is truly, if you believe in protected land use, you look at it from the actual physical property to the next physical property, which is, for me, lot line to lot line. Now, that's not how the rules are written in Anchorage. But I am not to the point right now where I can say yes to this one. And it's just simply because I believe the public trust when they say we want to keep these away from schools and daycare facilities and certain types of things. How can I look a constituent in the face and stand on the property line with them and say, like, there's a daycare, but, oh, it meets the rules because they're gonna walk around this fence over here. You know, to me, I haven't gone there yet, and I think my duty to the public supersedes the duty to the marijuana industry, frankly. And I, morally, ethically, I'm not to the point yet where I've gotten over that hump. Maybe before Tuesday I will. This is one that I've struggled with for a long time. So I've walked out there, so I've looked at it, I've tried to rationalize in my mind, okay, these, well, technically speaking, if they walk this way, I just, from a personal level, from a professional level, as a representative of a community that wants to keep these spheres of influence separate, I think this one's too close. So that's where I'm on this one. And it's a real struggle for me because I'm a big believer in people, you know, who see the rules, they follow the rules, they try to get in line with the rules and be good neighbors. And I suspect everything else in this packet looks okay to me. I don't see anything else. I just am having a real struggle with trying to keep those protected land uses protected. And to me, I think this is one of those things that frankly will violate the public trust. If any rational person goes and stands there, they're gonna say, what the heck was the assembly thinking? And if there comes a point where sometimes you do have to take into account the public trust. You have to take into account public perception. And to me, that is the, protecting the public's the number one thing. And protecting their trust is important to me. And I'm not there on this application, so I will not be supporting it at this point.
I know the area. There's a school 2 blocks down from it. McDonald's is down the street another block away from it. It's a magnet for kids in that area. I'm not comfortable with this one going forward. Sorry.
Do we have a vote or just go forward and say?
This is my very first application for the record that I'm not supporting, and to me, it does come down to the public trust. So,
I have a question. How many other marijuana licenses do we have in this area? It seems like we've had others.
You've got the one that's got the tire business down there on 88. They also have a license for a retail store going in there. I forget the name, but doing that tire business down there. And there's that one that's gonna open up on 88 near Cars. It's gonna open up some sort of a doctor-assisted health store. Yeah.
You've got Hillside Natural Wellness, Pull-Off, and then you've got 10th LLC, 2410 East 88th Ave. And so again, you know, I understand that it does look close, but even without the fence, it does meet the 500 foot. But I do understand your concerns. And maybe there's some landscaping or whatnot, some kind of shielding that we could put up that maybe would help on this, on the Arlen Street side in the back, so kids aren't seeing it. I mean, kids aren't really gonna go, from what I understand, they're gonna go on Lake Otis Parkway, so they're not really gonna see this area. And if we put up a fence that had, you know, slots in it, you know, kids aren't gonna really see through that either.
Where would your signs be?
In the front setback. So if you see the building set back, the signs have to be attached to the building.
So if you were on Arlen Street, would you see any indication it was a marijuana?
We could just keep the sign in the front on East 88th so that you wouldn't have that, you know, in case kids are not, there's no houses around, and the only houses are on the other side of Lake Otis Parkway, so I'm guessing that they're just going to be walking. I've never seen any kids walk down there on Arlen, but we could keep all of the signage just to the front on East 88th. It's what?
Tamron
it's a dirt
subdivision on
road, okay.
88 across the street of Lake Otis. There's big signs that says Tamron subdivision. Yes, I've got a lot of constituents that live over there. The kids walk down there to go to cars.
Oh, they would go down there.
Yes.
Okay, so you wouldn't want it on 88th, you'd want it on the
I wouldn't want an 88 if I'm not gonna approve this one, sorry. And I've not been opposed to any of them, but I just don't like the location for this one. From the neighborhood.
Any more comment? Someone want to make a motion one way or the other?
I'll make a motion to approve it, but it doesn't look like it's gonna pass.
Got a second? Oops.
That's for like a second, John, like you want a second. Do a vote, it'll still be a 2-tie tie.
Unless-
We missing somebody from that?
Unless Tom's against it. Well, Fred's not here and Kristen is here. So I suspect it would die anyway, both come to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we, I
Goes
guess
to
we'll
seven
move this
without
one forward with no recommendation, and, so we're just a committee looking at it. So on Tuesday, when this comes up, I will just state that we discussed it, went through the packet thoroughly, and that we will move, we had no recommendation on it. So at that point, it'd go to vote of the assembly members, but you're certainly, I mean, it's a public hearing, so you'll be able to comment, kind of maybe address some of these concerns.
Okay, and I would just reiterate, you know, public notices were sent and somebody from the childcare showed up, so it's, you know, if the community has an issue with it and the community has a problem with it, then the community needs to show up and participate. This can't just be a one-sided conversation.
Well, and I hate to tell you this, but there, you know, I probably outed some of my sources early that didn't want to be outed, but there are people, especially professionals, that don't want to publicly say anything. So they personally called me. I mean, went to the effort to call me and ask me to meet me at the location so I could see it. And so when I start having those conversations, listen, Dick's the representative in this area, I'm not. But that's why I asked a lot of questions about the distance and sight of line and all that kind of stuff. But I'll defer to the member from that district.
All right, thank you. Okay, next one is Alaska Joint Ventures. So we have, welcome to. Pull up.
We have the best business name.
Joint ventures.
Yep.
Just do both of them, they're retail on
I
there.
think I didn't see much difference between them. Do you want to go ahead and do that? Look at two lines. We'll discuss both at once. So Mandy, you want to address the?
So the, both applications, all of the licensing requirements were addressed in their operating plans. There was only one issue I saw on one of the applications, the retail. There was a missed initial line on the application on page 4. So maybe with the supplemental that we can add in, but it's initially slighted into the packet. But other than that, there were no taxes, fees, or fines down due, and all of the other requirements were addressed in their operating plan.
Sorry, what was this?
It's on page 5 of 115 in the packet. One of the initial lines for the application was missed.
Where it says the fees unrefundable.
Yeah,
Oh, just an additional.
yeah, just one of the initial lines was.
Someone's hand
was
cramped
missed.
up and they.
Yeah. Yeah, but we can get, that page additional and slip it in.
Okay. This is Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So AK Joint Ventures LLC, doing business as AK Joint, applying for both a special land use permit for marijuana cultivation and marijuana retail sales establishment. The cultivation facility will total approximately 970 square feet. The retail sales establishment will total approximately 1,123 square feet. Facilities, the cultivation and the retail sales establishment are located in the same strip mall, separate units. And that strip mall, or light industrial commercial strip mall, is located southeast of the intersection of King Street and East 77th Avenue in the Iowa District. Submitted site plan demonstrates general compliance with Title 21 standards with the conditions as stated in the AR and staff reports. Non-conforming rights have been established with a lack of site perimeter landscaping,
electric, sir?
This one does not require an upgrade for what they,
And so it's sufficient what they've done now?
sufficient for what's there.
Thank you, sir.
Any comment?
No, I didn't see anything on this one.
It's my Green Mile area. King Street. We're gonna change the name, by the way, right? Just feel like Green Mile Street.
So, yeah, Tinderbox is just across the
They're behind us.
back door, so to speak, in this one.
One block.
So, yeah, this is a good area for with the industrialized zoning. That's probably why we're getting several applicants in this area.
You know, I haven't thought, I mean, kind of not necessarily on this, but you have, they're fairly small units, and you have, there's like this dog care thing in the middle.
Dog stable or something.
So when you do, have we had problems with smell at any of the cultivation places? I mean, are these things working, the ventilation things working?
We have had some issues with some cultivation facilities in the municipality, and code enforcement has investigated those complaints and issued any enforcement actions as necessary.
Is it an operational thing, they're just not doing it right, or is the equipment not adequate?
I believe it comes down to management and operation, whether or not they're, keeping, using the proper filters or maintaining it with the
I
proper.
believe in one they upgraded their filters.
And that work?
I haven't heard anything else about it, so.
I think in your case, the problem might be the doggy daycare, maybe the fume problem and not you, but you're getting so close in that strip mall, and you know, you could smell the, whatever the smell is
The
from
only
the growth.
complaint that I
from the-
had just being there is they're noisy. That's it, and dogs bark a lot.
But if they smell your pot, and you're so close.
Oh, we're able to chill out.
Yes, that's what I was saying.
Anxiety level go down over there for the dogs.
Sort of a trade-off.
I wonder if my
They hear
dog-
the dogs and they smell the pot.
Unless they're former drug dogs.
That's true. Maybe a training facility.
Then they just sit, don't they?
Do what?
Don't drug dogs just sit?
I have no idea. I don't have one.
Okay, and then there was parking, but that's not a big issue, is that right?
The issue with the parking was just the location of the handicap stall. It didn't meet minimum grade requirements, so it just needs to be relocated to the conforming location.
Choose a different spot to put it in. And this is,
I believe they've already submitted a new site plan that shows the new handicap spot next to the other handicap spot. I think that was submitted yesterday, the day before, relocating the handicap spot going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the handicap spot is just, it's unlevel or something, or?
I believe it was at a 9% grade and minimum or maximum grade allowed on handicap spots 2%. Just slope to this.
Thank you.
okay, is there anything else on this? Have a motion?
I move to approve.
Second it.
Okay, any objection? So I think you heard, so at Tuesday's meeting, when this comes up, we'll say we looked at it and we recommended approval, and then we'll see what 7 other people say.
Thank you.
Good luck, thank you. So next up is minor modifications to the marijuana code. And this is, who's this, Ryan? Who's
So
on it?
the
Or is this one, this is
first
here?
one, the Title 10, is the licensing code change.
Ken, Ken.
And so the clerk's office works with Dean, and we have 2 different options. And this change is to address changes that the state made in their statutes regarding the transportation of marijuana between a licensed facility to another licensed facility. So we're updating our code to match the state. And then I have also an email from Erica that kind of goes over the state's point of the changes that they made. And then I also wanted to let you guys remind you that Jed is here, so if there's specific questions about the state changes, he can answer those too. But I was gonna let Dean kind of go through the 2
should I talk about the industry?
Sorry, yes, please.
Yeah, I have drafts of an ordinance here, so one has some markup on it that's got some red ink right now. So that one that has red markup on it is basically subsections A1 through 4, and that's different from what the states do regulations delete. The language is exactly similar to state regulation. States regulation change deletes 1 through 4. First sentence in red in A, it's the same as the state's sentence or new sentence after regulation change. So from one point of view, 1 through 4 help describe in detail what type of transportation is allowed. From another point of view, that much detail runs the risk of prohibiting some conduct which should probably be allowed. So I guess there's often two ways to go with drafting law. You can be broad and cover lots of conduct. You can be narrow and run the risk of prohibiting conduct which should be allowed. Unfortunately, broad, maybe allow conduct which should be prohibited. So that's pretty much the difference between these two. The other one, markup, it leads A1 through 4 that has the new sentence the state has. So, we talked with the municipal clerk's office. Original municipal clerk likes highlighting the detail of what type of transport marijuana is allowed in E1 through 4 here. So the changes in that version that you see is just changing some wording so that it's more specific about what's trucks. The licensee, description of the licensee, or an agent from point of the licensee, it adds that into each one of those 1 through 4. So we also asked the state agency office, why were they getting rid of 1 through 4, that detailed description of what type of transports are permitted. And we got that email from Erica and Jed, I understand, is here, we could talk to why they were getting rid of them, going to just one broad sentence, which is this, the red underline language. So it's really a policy choice for what you want to do in this time, which ordinance you want to recommend, being detailed, and then having A, in things the states, 1 through 4, being detailed as to what type of transports are allowed, or being broader, and doing exactly what the state did with the unmarked version that deletes 1 through 4. So I hope that's clear.
So when Erica says version 3, which one is she referring to?
Version 3 is the one that removes the 4.
Okay, so that's, so let's call that version 3. So to make it easier. The one with the major deletion, we'll call version 3. And is this version 1 then? The one with the red?
Yeah.
We got a 1 and a 3, which just makes you wonder. Okay, any thoughts?
My understanding, my understanding is you guys did this because of the testing facility debacle that happened. The guy was he didn't have the right person transport, or he transported it himself, or something like that. He ended up getting fined. Is that where this came from?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of came from a number of, my understanding is it came from a number of different incidents where it was just confusing for all license types. When we started digging into this, it just became apparent that it was kind of overly burdensome on the industry without really any clear directive of how this was protecting the public or how this was helping us track or keeping us from tracking where marijuana was going. And it was confusing for licensees, and so the result was that our enforcement team was just issuing a lot of notices of violation because licensees weren't following to the letter of this. And so we thought, why do we have this in the first place? Like, who's being protected here? What's the purpose? So it was mostly just, the intention was to clarify. We really felt like it was important to ensure that manifests were being tracked and that permitted marijuana handlers were the ones that were doing the transporting. But in terms of who could go and pick, like which license type could go pick it up versus which type could go drop it off, it was just kind of overly burdensome.
And No, I think you guys are right on. I thought that guy kinda got the short end of the stick, frankly, with his fine. I thought it was a little overkill. Because, yeah, that was a lot of overkill. But, I mean, it was what it was at that time, right? So, but I think this was something that was identified that clearly is an improvement that needs to happen. And you're right, in my view, it's a chain of custody, right? You just wanna make sure you know who's handling it and how it's getting from point A to point B. The way this is written, in either version, I'd like to get a little discussion on, it says, the establishment can transfer it by, either the license or an agent or an employee of the license. Are we including, I can see an industry where somebody just does marijuana transfer from this point to the testing facility or whatnot. Do we even have an industry that can do that now, or does it have to be an employee of either facility if this passes?
Through the chair, my understanding is that that's not a license type.
Right.
Transporting.
Right, well,
business.
we put or an agent. So
Right.
can an agent be a new industry? Because I can see a very logical industry that I'm just in the business of picking up your product and dropping it off and going back and forth. I mean, can we call that an agent?
I'd have to defer to people who are probably more close to it, but I think that they
There is
do
actually
exist.
people that are just, their whole thing is just transportation.
That's what I thought. I haven't really, we don't have.
And they do cool things too, like they'll come and like deliver cash payments to either like facilities or accountants that are invoice it out. They'll bring cash from like Fairbanks and drop it off and, this is your invoice payment, they'll sign for it. So it's not even just marijuana, they'll like just facilitate, what you need as business and stuff.
Essentially a courier, like a security courier.
Well, and that's what I'm making sure that we're not, I wanna make sure that's an ability, because I think that's a logical piece in the whole industry.
Provided, I think that they obtain a handler permit.
So that's the key, is
Yeah, they
even
have
if you have that intermediary, they have to have hidden, I knew there was something, that's why I'm asking. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let me go to Dick real quick.
Dean, do we need to define what an agent is for our purposes?
I don't think so. Agents are pretty much a term of art, a legal term of art. I think that as being suggested, a business contract with a marijuana establishment licensee to do transports only, and not being an employee who can come and agent that contract. So I think though that even if that's the case, that the requirements for the transport are still in place in other places in town. Looking at correct me if I'm wrong, seeing the manifest, what we're transporting, what marijuana, and all the tracking, packaging requirements. And you also have the person doing the actual transport inspect with marijuana handling. Is that correct? So, yeah, you have those requirements, and if that's not enough, then maybe one of the more detailed ordinance. And if you think that's enough for transporting marijuana, then you want to go version 3.
Thank you, Dean.
I think the agent, like I said, can do it by contract. This is services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're not considering creating another license type just for transporting marijuana or transporting marijuana funds or?
Can't speak for the board, but
There hasn't been discussion about that at this point?
yeah.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? We have some industry people here. Any comments on this? No change in your operations?
No, this is what the state's requiring.
So many things, we have two, the long version and the short, version 3 and version 1.
Well, I think version 3, I mean, as long as, the way I read it, marijuana or a marijuana product may only be transported to a licensed marijuana establishment, that being either cultivation, testing, retail, whatever it is, any marijuana establishment, by a licensee or an agent. I think that's an important part, or an employee of the licensee. I think that covers the gamut of potentially who's gonna have that chain of custody. And as they said, anybody, even an agent, I'm thinking of like a transport courier. If they're gonna be transferring marijuana, clearly the state's requiring they have a handler's permit. right? I'm looking at everybody making
Yep.
sure.
Yeah.
So I think they're, you know, in municipal code, we don't have that spelled out, but we've adopted so much of state code. They have to abide by both rules. I think, you know, that's clean. I don't have a problem simplifying it.
I think as long as they've got the manifest, the paperwork, everything should be able to be kosher. I mean, the reason they're transmitting this, they want them to go directly from one spot to another, is so they're not stopping somewhere to drop a little off, you know, on the side. That's not allowed, so.
And I think it's kind of crazy that, like, a licensee can't bring their own product to the testing facility. I think that's, well, they can clearly now, but I think we need to update it to make sure it's as clear.
That's regulation for the sake of regulation.
Yeah.
Dean?
Yes, I think I should also mention that in other places in chapter 1080 states regs, there's restrictions on who can sell to who. So I think that 1 through 4 kind of addresses certain types of transactions that are addressed elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Version 3.
So we have a motion to recommend version 3. Any objections? Okay. Good, thank you. Look what we did. We cleaned out code, made it shorter.
Made it shorter.
Okay, so next up. Potential variance regarding marijuana facilities. Is there someone here to talk about this?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Morning. Okay, you want to go ahead and sit up here, and then who, Dave, do you want to sit?
Ryan.
Or Ryan, Ryan can cover it, okay. Do you want to go ahead and start the
Yeah, I'll just give
conversation?
a real brief introduction. The planning department was approached by a district representative, Mr. Lang, regarding a proposed marijuana facility that would not meet the 200 foot as the crow flies separation distance from lot line to lot line for protected land use. Given the unique situation that we're in with this variance, and that is the first marijuana variance that's potentially to be applied for, we thought it was appropriate to have Mr. Lang come before you, the committee, and do sort of a pre-application sort of meeting, sort of gauge exactly if you were to go before you.
Do you have that picture of the aerial?
I do, I have copies of this.
And it's on the back of your. It's the one to your right in your classroom.
Good morning. Jonathan Lang from Lang Associates. We're consulting with the property owner on this, and they were approached to have a tenant go into one of the 3 outbuildings on their site. The location is Diamond Boulevard, across from Burlington Coat Factory. As you can see on the map, it's presented as near Siam Cuisine. The building in question was most recently a liquor store. Diamond Boulevard is 180 feet wide in this area. Strict compliance of the code as you have it written would require 200 foot lot line to lot line separation, and we don't have that with Diamond Boulevard. Looking at the map, again, to the top right is the proposed location, and the protected use is in the south end of the Burlington Coat Factory Mall. Again, we're looking at a tenant-to-tenant situation here where my client is the landowner looking to have a tenant with this type of establishment, and then there are 2 churches that share a space in the south end of the Burlington Coat Factory Mall. They're also tenants, they're not the actual owners of the structure. And again, we're just exploring the possibility, as I'm sure you're all aware, with the marijuana regulations, having the location is the first item of business that you need to before you can apply for anything. So we're exploring the feasibility of putting this here. My narrative on the back of the drawing, on the second sheet, addresses the variance standards. What else would you like to know?
That's good, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you, you, Mr. Chairman. So, as the crow flies, if we went from here to the back end of the mall, how far is that?
The shortest walking distance would be 1,080 feet.
What's the shortest, why are you seeking a variance? Because you don't meet the 200 feet. What is the actual distance between the protected land use? Is it 180 feet?
1,080 feet.
No, what I'm asking is.
The lot line distance is 180 feet, because that's the width of Diamond Boulevard.
That's what I'm asking. All right, thank you. And that's why, Ryan, can you explain this again? The difference between 1,080, the 500, and what the 200 means?
Sure, so we have three sort of tiers to the separation distance measurement. So the Assembly enacted a 200-foot lot line to lot line as a crow flies separation distance from a marijuana establishment to all protected land uses. So that's all 15 of them. Then we have a 500-foot as a crow flies lot line to lot line separation for schools. Then we have a 500-foot shortest practical pedestrian route that's measured in a couple different ways depending upon what protected land use it is, whether it's main entrance or whether it's lot line. So the variance that would be applied for in this situation would be that first tier, if I call it that. The inability to meet that 200-foot separation distance from lot line to any protected land use. So 200 feet.
Dave, did you want to check?
You know, I was just gonna mention the fact that, Mr. Lang has worked with the planning department to figure out solutions to this, potential problem. We had looked at possibly doing a subdivision that would, you know, fully meet the letter of the law, but considering the fact that, you know, we've got more than 1,000 foot of separation between, the proposed marijuana facility and the protected land use, we felt like, you know, this is a good option to, you know, to look at the variance, knowing full well that this has not come up before. So, I just want to bring up the fact that he's looking at other options that would meet the full letter of the law.
And what would be the problem with replat?
Well, I don't know, replatting is obviously a time intensive process, it's costly, and are we really achieving much by doing that? I mean, I think by meeting the letter of the law, yes, you might be complying, but you're still not doing much to separate the protected land use from the marijuana facility, so is it necessary?
All right, thanks. Any other thoughts? You know, when we did the 200 foot, kind of the discussion was around where if you had almost this situation where you could have had potentially, if there were a church directly across from your operation, and we said after a major arterial you have to take crosswalks. So you could have Hot Shop here and right across the street in their face a church. And we said, let's do this 200 feet for exactly this situation. But that's not what's going on here. And I know this area fairly well. And this south side of Diamond is a whole different world from the north side. You don't cross, you don't walk, people don't walk in that area. This is about, I don't know what the ADT is on Diamond there, but it's huge, it's constant traffic. And people turning into Burlington, that's almost as bad as Old Seward and Diamond as far as crossing. So we've created two separate worlds there with that, basically a highway there. So it makes sense to me. I think this whole separation distance is baffling. I think that 200 foot makes sense, but it's this whole different world.
There's always the anomaly, and this seems to be it.
Any thoughts on this? Have you been by here?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Are you familiar?
Mm-hmm, I know exactly what. You heard her, but I don't know if you were here in the first application. I'm pretty passionate about separation, protect land uses for a specific reason. If this were to go through and come to me for analysis, and Amy was ruling the world and made the decision, the mitigating factor here would be Diamond Boulevard, clearly, right? It's a 4-lane road, I mean, it's not easily, and the fact that the church is in the backside of this particular, I've actually been in that church, so it's in the backside. But what I would tell you is the whole point of direct land use is to separate spheres of influence. I know I'm not supposed to use that term, but,
Bubbles, we say bubbles.
bubbles of influence, thank you for helping me, bubbles of influence. So if I were even gonna consider going and trying to keep these bubbles of influence separate and giving a variance for something like this, which originally there was no way I would ever even consider it. But, what I would say is if the applicant were to come to us, I would be very, very, very sensitive to where their signage is placed. Because I don't want all these people going to this church to have to drive by a very obnoxious looking, in your face, hey, look, here's pot. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because what we're asking now is for the community to put the rules aside and say, well, but for this one case, because it's a slippery slope, right? And if we're trying to keep those bubbles of influence separate, we don't wanna put it in their face. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I personally would not wanna see the signage, and this is counter to a business plan, because of course you wanna put your signage where people can see it. I frankly I would either wanna see something discreet, or I would wanna see something, not on Diamond Boulevard. You know, right there. And frankly, it's because you're asking us to go and change the rules for you. And again, it is just what John said, we were trying not to do it like, here's church, but oh look, you have to walk all the way around, so it really doesn't count. But in this particular case, the church is up here too. But logic tells you people are gonna be driving to go to the church right past it. So, you know, it's just something that I would consider if I was making the recommendation to the applicant is, you know, potentially even have pictures of what your sign's gonna look like, show us exactly where you're gonna put your sign. Try to be proactive and considerate of your neighbors who are there first. Does that make sense?
Just, if I could just follow up on that, I mean, if I know, but there's rezones and things you put special limitations, and if there's a variance, I mean, can we put a special limitation? You know, we approve this variance, but signs must be on the west and north side of the building, or not on the east and the south, because then you wouldn't see it from Diamond. Is that done?
Well, I would say, because this variance is gonna be accompanying the permit application, so you can certainly impose conditions on that application, so yes, I mean, it may be a condition, it may not be an actual special limitation like you'd see on a rezoning, but certainly you can impose, special conditions on this approval.
And that would be at the time, but should they ultimately come forward?
Absolutely.
We could do that.
Yeah.
So, my question is, where was the front door to the former liquor store? Is that on the southwest side or on the north side?
There's that angled wall on the building, and it's on that side. It's right.
So it doesn't face Diamond right now anyway?
No, the main door doesn't face Diamond.
So you're not planning to put the main door facing Diamond? All right, so that's sort of a mute issue, I guess.
Well, it depends, because if I was a business owner, I would put a sign right on Diamond Boulevard too. So, I mean, it just depends on what their plan is. I didn't think they would move the door, but because you want visibility, I mean, that's kind of what you want.
I think they have signs. I mean, you can see it's a liquor store driving down the street, it's not just on the door.
Well, it's vacant now.
But
Yeah, you could. There is a signpost, where that's, the rectangle is near the 180 feet area, or arrow, that indicates a bus stop. Right underneath that is actually the sign for the mall.
Where is the bus stop there?
If they don't have a curb cut for it, it's just right off the Diamond.
is there a bus running on Diamond anymore?
Yes.
Oh, right there. Right there is where those little buses, I'm assuming that little bus icon is where the stop is.
It's right about there, but it's, of course, out of Diamond.
So that's a freestanding sign that you're not gonna be using, right?
That's for the mall, and I don't know.
Oh, it's for the
Again,
mall.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it's for the entire.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I'll just say this to you because you pointed it out, which you probably wish you didn't at this point, but, again, I mean, asking for a variance, and there's a bus stop right there too, I mean, that could be something that is controversial. You know, I can see parents coming and saying, my kid takes the bus, or I take the bus, and now there's, you know, pot shot 20 feet, and you're asking for a variance, and there's the bus stop too. I'm just throwing it out there, just, when it comes to us, this might come up. I mean, it's people move a bus stop, it's not a school bus stop, but just throwing it out there. You might hear public, you know, comments about that.
Brian?
I guess I've just a bit confused. I mean, most stops aren't protected lanes.
No, I never said they were, but what I'm saying is he wants a variance from the 200 foot, and complicating that might be a parent who says, well, there's a bus stop right there too, so now you wanna break the rules, and there's you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying bus stops are protected land use. I'm just saying where people congregate, they tend to notice change.
Compounding factor.
Yeah, that's all. I'm just pointing out. I wasn't saying anything, I'm just pointing it out.
If you had added in, maybe told at the beginning.
Yeah.
If you had made that clause for buses.
Jana, go ahead.
Just for my own, learning purposes, the tier 1 cards and games, is that an arcade? They've got, Whiz Kids.
I actually thought the same thing when I saw it.
And I just don't know.
But then I thought maybe, they sell games or something.
Yeah, and they have tournaments and stuff. So is that where, are we considering that?
It's a mini Bosco's.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know.
It's a very nice business. She does a good job there, but it's not an arcade.
Okay.
Any other comments? So, you want from us what?
I suppose, Mr. Chair, that I would like some sort of resolution that I can take back to my client. Again, my client is reluctant to sign a lease for the property unless there's some sort of, nothing in this world is guaranteed, but some sort of understanding that this is acceptable to pursue.
Smart.
Yeah.
I think it may be acceptable to pursue, but you're still dealing with body of 11. Nothing we do here is gonna guarantee that the majority of 11 will vote to approve it.
Potentially, we could put something forward to the whole body, though, resolution. I mean, does that make sense?
I would never vote for, even saying I would support a variance until I see the full packet. Because I just don't know yet. I have to see the size, the scope, the scale. Signage is important to me. We heard that today. If you're looking for a definitive answer, I don't think we can give it to you. But if it was me, I would go back and tell the client exactly what the conversation was and say, it's a possibility, but there's only 4 members out of an 11-member body here. I mean, it's a roll of the dice, to be honest with you.
Does this have to go to planning and zoning?
So, this is a decision made by us as part of the application process. So we could have a motion to say conceptually, we're not uncomfortable with this variance, just from this body. That's what we did.
I'd be willing to make that motion.
Any second?
Not until I see the application.
If I could say one more thing, this is kind of one of the circular things about this process. They have to have a location first before they can make application. So again, that's why.
Right, and at this point, you don't need the law. So if we've never issued a variance for marijuana use yet, you could be the first. But by the time you got your application to us, you obviously have to have a property. You could be denied. It could be approved. 4 members of an 11-member body can't tell you that. But you're not getting united consensus here. That tells you there is viable reason that you should approach this with trepidation.
Anything else? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, next is proposed regulations, changes to Title 21. And this is Ryan, what present?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. First thing I'll just note is that this AO is not scheduled for the assembly hearing date. It's just an AO up for discussion right now.
It's a speculative AO. It's not got a home.
Correct. As you're aware, marijuana businesses, the first approval that was granted was end of last summer. We've been at this a year now. We've been at adequate time to sort of analyze the code and see where there's deficiencies, where we need clarifications, where there's inconsistencies. And what this aims to do is kind of clean up a little bit of that and clean up most of it so that we've got a better code going forward. So what I'll do is go through section by section. We've got the other ones already.
Yeah.
So section 1 just adds noticing requirements to both marijuana modifications that require a public hearing and marijuana variances. And what that is when we added the section that allowed for modifications to approved special land permits for marijuana, we had a provision in there that said that all modifications requiring public hearing must be noticed in accordance with Chapter 3, Section 020H. But when you go to that section, there's no guidance. It doesn't tell you exactly how it's supposed to be noticed. So this cleans that up. And also the marijuana variances, with other variances, say, you're applying for a long plat, and also applying for a subdivision variance, that case is noticed as this subdivision with variances too. So what we're envisioning is that a marijuana special land permit would be noticed in accordance with those requirements, but it would also say and variances to such and such provision.
So one mail.
One mail. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All right, and then section 2, the addition of a scaled-in dimension floor plan depicting the entirety of the licensed premises, its arrangement of rooms in relation to all other uses located within the same building. The planning department has been requiring scaled-in dimension floor plans since the acceptance of the first special land use permit for marijuana, but we never had it codified. Scaled-in dimension floor plan is necessary for us to verify licensed premises square footage and also for code enforcement staff when they go out to ensure that on-site conditions match the plans that were approved by the facility.
This one interests me because we've obviously seen it. I was surprised it wasn't in here because somewhere in the code, if there's a change to it. So I guess if there's a change, we went through, if there's a change to the plan of more than X%, then you have to come to us, but they were never required by code to have it in the first place.
Correct. We have a code requirement for a scale dimension site plan, but of course that just gives us a building outline, parking, traffic circulation, but we don't get to see what goes on inside the licensed premises and information themselves.
Just for industry people, is there any issue with this at all?
We're already on it.
The state requires it. And it's online.
Yeah, we see it at least twice in our packets when we go through them. Okay. Thanks.
And then language for subsection 10, expiration. Dean has a couple edits in there. I have one edit, and I'll explain my one edit, and that would just be subsection B, if the use for which the permit was approved has been discontinued, vacant, or inactive for a continuous period of at least 1 year. So we're getting rid of 6 months and we're expanding that to 1 year. And that puts it in line with alcohol special land permits. And it also makes it more realistic for these applicants because we've had applicants that, again, got approved last summer, still don't have their doors open for business. And inactivity, we define as not taking out a building permit. Building permits can be good for up to 18 months depending on what type of work is being done. So this just gives a little more flexibility to the industry.
That's okay. On A, I think you want to get rid of the word "of" for the first one. All right, 6 days after expiration.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then okay, and then why the 60 days?
If I may, that was my suggestion. Currently, it says it expires any time the state of municipal license expires. But a special land use permit, it runs long. And sometimes people may want to sell a business and sell a property. But anyone who's to apply for the license, I think there's 30 there's no license, but watching this special land use permit expire, and then we'll have to go through the whole process. If they're not changing anything, the site, the building, and everything, they're just taking over the business and moving the whole layout in place. In addition, we went through the expiration dates in an ordinance a couple months ago. It's a renewal application for a license. It could be filed late and then expire already. The person that be able to operate after September 1st for a period of time until the renewal application is actually processed complete. So I kind of arbitrarily chose 60 days as a sufficient amount of time for these kind of circumstances that might occur. Perhaps it should be longer. I also looked at the alcohol provisions, and it doesn't have a comparable expiration depending on the expiration of the state's liquor license. It doesn't have that at all. So it does say 120 days after the transfer of the license to sell alcohol from the premises has been approved by the state alcohol beverages control board. There's an application filed. It's not really applicable to the marijuana license situation. So anyways, I envisioned a couple situations where you might expire on the special land use permit, go through the process again, but nothing changed. And they're supposed to run commands, which needs to make sense to have at least a grace period between license expiration. We might be able to renew it, get a new one, or new owner take over and have their license application in, and not have the special land use permit expire to another plan as well.
So the implication is that, can you get through the process in 60 days? We got some industry people here who would know.
It's a close license.
That's the pot.
To renew the state and municipality license?
Is that what we'd be looking for here?
After the expiration, I mean, you submit it before the expiration.
The state doesn't have anything to do with this law.
Well, it says special land use permit shall expire 60 days after the date of the state.
But we're not asking though, when we're talking about a special land use permit for the municipality of Anchorage, we're not asking what you're doing in the state. Really, that's,
Right.
what you need for the special land use permit for the municipality is how long does it take you to get through the municipal process.
Right, but my concern is the state, last time the state was late on deeming applications complete for renewal for the state licenses, so I don't know how that would tie into here. Because then our expiration date was extended for the state licenses, so I don't see a problem with it. I think probably 90 days would be a little bit better, because doesn't it take about 90 days to get through your process anyways? For a special land use, it's always the estimate we get in the days.
It's 60 days from the time of application, approximately from the time of application to when the application goes before the assembly, but they're also required to have a community meeting for a new application. This, of course, with a community meeting would be triggered here. 60 days is an approximate number. 90 would be more flexibility.
And that doesn't include the chunk of time between when the other departments get to review it and we put it towards the assembly. So there's a chunk of time after they've gone through this process where it walks a little, depending on when they get on the agenda.
So Ryan, I was just gonna ask you, just clarify for me, and you just said it, you said the approximate time right now for a special land use permit is about 60 days to get it before the assembly. Do all the process, and then it's before the assembly within that 60 days window.
From the time frame that we get a complete application to when it goes before the assembly is approximately 60 days.
Just like Jenna said, something about 90 days, I think 90 days is more reasonable.
We're always told 90 when we submit when we're going through this process that.
Make sure this works for the industry as well as the city.
Is there any drawback with 90?
I think.
Chair Webster, just to be clear, we're talking about the expiration of a special land use permit, and that starts a clock during which if no activity occurs at all, that's when a license, or sorry, a permit becomes in jeopardy. As long as they initiate some sort of action, the clock stops and it's a moot point.
But this is, so all they have to do is submit in those 60.
Correct.
So if it takes
Oh.
90 days.
Just lift your finger and we'll stop the clock.
Okay.
That's fine.
So the 60 is okay then, we think?
I like the fact that switching. I think that was a good idea.
Well, as long as they initiate a renewal of some sort?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, good, thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess moving on, my next change.
Do you wanna, let's go with Ryan and then Dean? Or do you wanna do that?
Okay, the next change.
Well, is it 10B?
Oh, 10B.
Line 26. I just changed for holding the permit to the use for which the permit was approved. I think it's just semantics. So after I wrote this, I looked at the liquor says that he was holding the permit, so this change is really important. Just thought it was better language.
I like your language better. Exactly. Holding a permit. Oh, I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then, so section 11 variances, what I did is proposing to delete the language to approve a variance, the assembly shall consider the following, and instead add language, standard variance language from other variances that are applied for. And what this does is, the word standards is in there, and I know that that may scare kids simply a little bit because they feel like they have to address standards, but the variance approval process is laid out in 2103-240, and you did a notwithstanding clause when you passed it before, so the assembly does not have to issue a separate resolution to approve a variance and state findings of fact for your standard. But what this does is, instead of, I guess, making it more of a lackadaisical approval where the assembly shall consider all the following, this tightens up its standards and puts the burden of proof on the applicant to say, how do you meet these standards? Prove to us that you meet these standards, and we'll evaluate it based upon that.
Any thought? You know, on the planning commission, we'd always have to have findings. And it's almost like that's what you're looking for. We have to state they'd have to tell us the reasons, and we give a variance, we should say these are the reasons. Is that what this with particularity means? Is that a common thing?
This is the same exact language that you would find in 2103-240, which is variances approval process check. However, there is a notwithstanding clause in there. So the assembly does not have to issue findings of fact on each standard when approving variance.
I actually like this section because I think what it does is it gives the applicant the opportunity to say, this is the relief sought, and here's all really good reasons why. And look, they match up with code. So I think it's a very logical way that you can evaluate each potential variant.
So we should have put this before the previous thing we talked about.
Depending upon when this ordinance would go before the assembly, it would definitely affect the situation. It may change your application. It wouldn't change the approval process.
Okay, any thoughts? Francis?
Yeah, just looking at this now, if you look at A through E, the variance standards, while it may be true that these are the same variance standards for any dimensional variance that comes before our boards or commissions, these are pretty strict and hard to meet. The D seems to be definitely an obstacle to the granting of a variance. D says the variance is the minimum variance necessary to allow reasonable use of the property. So when is anyone going to be able to say that a variance needs to be granted and in order to allow for a marijuana establishment to make reasonable use of the property? Because there's probably already reasonable use of it before marijuana, or basically this standard is saying that you couldn't use the property for anything unless you grant this variance.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true because if I'm thinking about the specific location we were just talking about, if it used to be a liquor store and it sat vacant for a year and the owner says, listen, I cannot rent it out. I mean, I can't there's no market for it, but this one potential came to me and, you know, here's the things we'll do to mitigate the other differences, but I think somebody could show from an economic standpoint that, especially if they, you know, that this potentially could be a reasonable use. Does that make sense? Or am I off base, do you think?
No, I don't think, I mean, someone could make the argument about economics, but in terms of when a planner looks at the land use code or the zoning code and then says what is a reasonable use of the land, it's, if the zoning is R1 and it's single family housing, the variance is like, well, you couldn't have a single family house unless the variance were to be granted. In the same way, you take B3 property or I1 property, so general commercial or light industrial. You wouldn't be able to do any of the uses that are allowed in that district as a by right permitted use unless this variance is granted. But because marijuana is this special entitlement, you know, you could sort of counter that, well, while, you know, the liquor store didn't work out, wasn't economically feasible, the property could be used for any number of other uses that are allowed in that district. And I don't know if, I can't think of a case where we've allowed, you know, the economic argument to really factor into this standard of approval.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, perhaps an additional clause on that statement that specifies this is for reasonable use of the property for a special land use permit or for a marijuana establishment would help clear this up. We're veering off a little too far into the hypothetical weeds of land use across the bowl, and I believe these standards are designed to address the case that we just went through, where it is not reasonable to hold that location, that former liquor store, to the same standard because of some really bizarre circumstances. So it is reasonable to request a variance in that case in order to proceed with the marijuana retail establishment. So perhaps adding some language, some clause to that will help clear that up. We solve Francis's dilemma.
Well, yeah, I kind of penciled if we said the variance is the minimum variance necessary to allow a licensed marijuana establishment on the property. I mean, that kind of gets to the heart. Because we're just talking about marijuana operations.
Would that make more sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to throw a wrench into this process, and I would want to take a day to sort of consider Chris's proposal, but I think that's a really smart suggestion. We just need to think long term. This is specific to marijuana special land use permits, and so it seems like a good solution and reasonable, but then we don't want to tilt it too much that we're just sort of granted, you know, giving these out like hotcakes either. I mean, there needs to be good standards. They need to be well thought out. And you know, I've talked with Jana before. These are really hard standards to meet, and you'd have to be pretty bold to go ahead and apply for the variance. And as they're written now, you know, I don't know of an instance where a variance would be granted. So if they were tailored a little bit better, then it might meet the situation, the circumstances a little bit better.
I think the high bar is intentional, and again, going back to the case that we just heard, it would be very easy to check off all of the boxes with that particular case. So it is designed to apply in special cases only. The high bar is intentional, and I think that it's not unreasonable, and as we heard in the previous case, there are going to be examples where it will meet those criteria, and we're not handing out hotcakes, although I'm not really hungry. Thanks, Francis.
I think before you go, Ryan, throw in a philosophical thing. This is a meeting where you should throw wrenches in everything. So this is a level where we want to find out the problems and everything, rather than after it's passed. We don't want an assembly meeting, and we don't want it as your counter first time someone comes in for a variance. So please throw all the wrenches you've got. Thanks, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that normally for a dimensional or design variance, the economic argument can't be used or can't be factored into the decision. However, just pointing out again, we have a notwithstanding clause here, basically ignoring that whole chapter 3 to 40 section. So an economic argument may be able to be used in this situation for marijuana, especially.
So, Mr. Chairman, are we planning to make an amendment to D to add the language that Francis just mentioned, or what's?
I think, it's a good idea. I would go with Francis's recommendation, just let the planning department kind of chew on this one for a day or two and kind of think about what's the best way. They heard our discussion. I think they kind of understand where we're going and just come up with logical language, if they'd be willing to do that.
It's your call.
Well, that's, I mean, we're not, what's our schedule on this? I mean, you're running into some problems and we're just tightening up, is it?
I think we'd be looking at getting it scheduled for an assembly hearing fairly quickly here, probably in the next week or so.
So there's some urgency because you're running into problems?
Well, it has to be introduced so we could just do a floor amendment, you know?
Correct, yep.
Or you would introduce it on Tuesday?
No.
No,
The next one?
the next one.
So you have time, you could rework this?
We have over a week.
Keep in mind, we're doing budget decisions now. So nothing takes precedent with budget. So if this gets pushed back, because we're dealing with the budget, that's just sort of how it's gonna be.
It's only a one.
Go ahead.
Is the committee meeting next Thursday? Is our deadline to submit for agenda the 24th for introduction is next Friday? There's time to come back and get it.
Do we have any
Next week.
We could.
We could do that. Yeah, it's our regular meeting, so it's not marijuana one, but it's a.
I'm not pushing for more meetings, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
We already have it scheduled.
Let's see where we land. I mean, some of these things,
Because this
I don't
seems
know that we need
relatively
another
easy.
meeting.
No.
It's
This
a
one-
one-line amendment.
Yeah, that's what I think.
We're not done yet.
We're fine.
They've got a day job, they can choose over the plan.
You hit one of my pet peeves though in your next amendment, I gotta tell you. Keep going.
Section 3 is an amendment to the table of allowed uses and adding a footnote. So this is quite a unique situation that we've established with marijuana, where nowhere else in code do we have uses that are allowed subject to the co-location and attachment to other uses. So we run into this scenario where since an individual can pursue a variance for marijuana, for example, we have retail establishments that are only allowed if attached, only allowed in the I2 district if they're attached and co-located to cultivation or manufacturing. So somebody could come in and apply for a variance, and you could have a commercial use that was allowed in perpetuity if the variance was granted, allowed in perpetuity in an I1 district. When that's an exception to code, that's not something that we would typically like to see. So what this does is all those sections of code that grant those kind of unique occurrences, marijuana cultivation facilities are permitted in B3 when it co-located and attached to marijuana retail sales establishment. It pulls it out of chapter 5 and puts it as a footnote, so thus making it ineligible that somebody could come in and apply for variance. And the reason that we give maybe a little bit of heartburn over somebody applying for this is because by applying for a variance to that standard in a roundabout way, you are applying for a variance to a use, and that's not allowed in code. So we saw this as an easy fix that still allows those uses to remain, but it just takes away that eligibility for variances.
That makes sense to me, but can I ask you this? So, why, rather than saying as the flow flies, why don't we just say in a straight line? Do we have the term as the crow flies defined somewhere? I'm gonna,
We're skipping ahead a little bit.
You did skip ahead, but I'm going back because.
You're on
I'm on section 3.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with section 3, but because you skipped the other one, I wanted to go back and ask you that question. Do you have the term as the crow flies defined in code? We only have like a few minutes left, so I don't wanna skip this meeting. Oh, I thought we had to move by 10:30, that's why.
Half an hour to define what a crow is.
I was rolling him back, cause I'm like, we're not gonna skip this one.
The term as the crow flies, that terminology, I'm flexible with changing that.
I flippin' hate that terminology.
But
Because most people, and here's why, Ryan.
Wait, hold on 1 second. So are we done with section 3?
I want to go back to section 3, but I didn't understand why we were skipping section 2.
We did, 2 was done.
Or section, well, yeah.
You're talking
Section 4.
Oh, I skipped ahead.
You said you're from a section.
I'm
3.
so sorry. No, I totally agree with you on section 3. So I'll just hold my question. We'll go back to the crow fly definition in a little bit.
So where's Exhibit A here?
Right in the back of the package.
Yeah, here we go. So you didn't change anything, you just put it here, so it's connected.
The only language that was deleted is.
It was 10:30, but for some reason.
The language that the assembly could approve marijuana retail sales, cultivation establishment of B3 if they had submitted an application for an attached and co-located retail sales establishment. That language isn't really necessary anymore, considering that the state is processing all their applications at approximately the same speed now. And also by adding that language, we unknowingly created an unfair advantage for that scenario, but put people that want to have a retail sales establishment in the I-2 that's attached and co-located to cultivation or manufacturing at a disadvantage because we didn't include them with that sort of provision that they can come in and submit an application for retail and get approved if they submit an application for their cultivation and manufacturing afterwards. Okay, so.
Dean?
That change to that table relates also to the deletions in the other parts of the code. On page 6, in deletions, for those use statements, the lines 19, 96, and 29, 33. Is that right, Ryan?
Correct.
Those deletions relate to that deletion table.
Correct.
Just a typo.
Right. So we're making code shorter again.
Yes.
Here's why I like it.
Short and sweet.
Like anything else, once you constrict, it's going to expand.
Janet?
I guess I'm just not sure why we're saying, okay, we can grant a variance from protected land uses, but we can't grant a variance, and I disagree with your fact that it's granting a variance of the use. It's not granting a variance of the use, because the use is allowed if co-located. It's granting a variance of the co-located requirement. So I mean, like having a retail in I-2, you know, if it makes sense and there's other retail out, why wouldn't you want a variance there in the heaviest of industrial areas? I mean, that's where these things traditionally go. I just don't understand the logic behind that. You know, it's not it's not saying a manufacturing can go ahead and just be, or a retail, or cultivation just be in B3 by itself. It's the co-location that you're giving a variance from. And so, you know, these protected land uses we've discussed now for almost 2 years or more, and we're gonna give variances for the protected uses, but we're exempting the co-located from that variance requirement, and I just don't really see that as good policy.
Well, I think the planning department sees this, as Ryan mentioned, as a use variance, because the, in the B3, the cultivation is not legal there without co-location as part of a retail establishment. So if you eliminate the retail component, then it's not an allowed use. So that's where the idea or the opinion comes from the planning department that it would be a use variance. It just so happened that the variance was allowed because the co-location portion of that was a use-specific standard, and the code allowed for variances to come from a use-specific standard. So the idea behind this amendment would just be to remove that part.
But that same logic that you applied to the distance, you know, if it's not 200 feet as the crow flies or directly measured, then that use is not allowed. But now we're creating a variance that would, even if not 200 feet, separate that use then is allowed.
Yeah, I would disagree with you there. I think that that the separation distance is a use-specific standard, whereas the retail cultivation co-location portion would be, like I said, more of a use variance.
Francis, yeah.
Yeah, the planning department never intended for you to be able to apply for a variance from the requirement to be co-located with this other type. I mean, we just did, and we've sort of discovered that now that the rules have been in effect that, oh, technically you could apply for a variance and then you wouldn't have to be co-located. And we're like, we need to fix that.
Well, I think it's a question of the assembly. What does the assembly want? You know, does the assembly intend to allow it? Well,
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just add in to the previous example that Francis had mentioned where, you know, you can't get a dimensional variance to build a single family home on a lot because the lot may have some sort of funky orientation or something. By granting that variance, you're not granting a use for a single family home. You're just allowing somebody to actually use that property
For its intended
purpose. This is a very different situation. This is approving a use in a roundabout way.
I mean, I will just say that I remember discussions about this when, like, Fuzzy Buds, for example, when you guys saw Fuzzy Buds, and they had their little retail because they, you know, had to. You guys made the representation to the industry and to the public that if it was, you know, maybe you would come back to that and maybe figure out that that little retail wasn't, you know, such a requirement to that B3 cultivation area. So I mean, there was a completely different discussion when we talked about these co-location requirements and what we're talking about now. And I think the only reason that this was raised is because an applicant specifically asked about this co-location, and getting a variance was the only suggestion that the planning department could offer as a solution. So this kind of irks me a little bit to exempt it from the variance when if we're gonna exempt and give a variance for churches and schools and whatnot, I'm just not behind the logic of not allowing a variance power to apply to co-location with, if somebody wants to put a retail in I-2 and they can come to the assembly and show why, I mean, I don't see why that would be a negative thing.
Okay. Dean?
I'm not as familiar with this issue as some of you, but reading this language, I think using the word variance is a misnomer. This isn't a variance at all. This is saying, for example, retail is prohibited in the I-2 district except if it's co-located. So it's saying it's not generally permitted in the I-2. It's permitted only under certain circumstances as a use. And there's no variance application or request required, it's just here in code. So I don't think using the word variance is really applicable here. And comparing that to the variance process, separation distances and so forth, that's apples and oranges. So that's just the way I'm seeing this.
If it's not a variance, what is it?
It's a permitted use under certain circumstances rather than permitted use generally. So retail isn't permitted in I-2, but it is permitted in co-located. And that's just how you have to apply for it. You don't have to meet that use circumstance.
Well, I was just gonna say, this is, Dean said it better than I could have, but, sometimes I think we get bogged down in planning terminology, and for some of us non-planners, you tend to go down a rabbit trail. But I think this goes back to the fact that the assembly chose, when we were posed with the question of let's make more options available for the industry, the assembly chose to expand where certain uses could go. And part of this particular discussion was you have to have both, because there were certain characteristics within the planning world and within development world that we didn't want to see overtake a neighborhood. Am I right on that, Francis?
Yeah, that was the planning department's position was, you know, your general retail is intended for commercial retail, not for industrial. We allowed this sort of weird quirk where you could have manufacturing and cultivation in a commercial district, but only if it was co-located with the retail component. So it's actually sort of advantaged the industry or this type of use. If you couldn't have a bakery in a particular district, now you can if it's co-located with retail. It's sort of already carved out a special place that other general uses like industrial. You couldn't have an industrial use in a commercial district, but marijuana can as long as it's co-located. So they've already got sort of this compromise built into it.
Right, and so with with the discussion, I'm not talking about the discussion at the committee level about a specific retailer, but what I'm talking about, I was there when this was expanded for the industry special, so they could have potentially more opportunities. And I'm kind of at that point where you give an inch and they wanna take a mile. I mean, if we're identifying, you know, we don't give variances for something that we've given as an extra use. We don't give variances for those. And now we realize, okay, well, we need to clean up our language just to make sure people understand. I think that makes sense, and that's why I didn't have a problem with this particular section. I personally just think it makes sense. To make it as clear as we can for the industry and for the public, when they read the code, they understand what it means. I'm with the planners on this one. You don't hear me say that all the time.
I think we should change that.
They're gonna replay it at the staff meetings.
Okay, any other thoughts on it? So, I mean, looking at it combined, we're deleting a lot of verbiage, we're putting it in a table. My general feeling is most people will be going to this table right out the gate, what can I do where? And not going through reading something and saying, oh, I also have to go over this section of code. That's when you miss things. So this seems a lot tighter to me.
I think it's just simpler.
Okay, so any recommendations on this legally? Okay. I just say, the reason we went to 11, it usually takes us about half an hour for each marijuana application. We were quicker today, but we had the 3 new things brought up.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I just thought we had a certificate of participation work session at 11.
No, I think
I have a meeting at 11:30.
And so that's
Let me
why,
find it.
I thought we were done at 10:30. That's why I was trying to rush. A little, sorry.
Is that tomorrow?
Yeah, I thought.
Tomorrow.
But I thought that was tomorrow.
Yeah, I thought this was it today.
We have it tomorrow, it said 11 o'clock tomorrow, Friday.
Oh, I thought we had our special meeting at noon.
No, we have, remember that word?
Okay, as long as I'm wrong. that's
11
okay.
o'clock, you're wrong.
It happens.
It's tomorrow.
And it has happened the second time. One time before I thought I was
You
wrong.
might say that in the radio today, you were actually wrong.
I was wrong. Once.
Which reminded Chris of something, so off you go.
Oh.
Right, I do have something to go to.
All right. Sorry, I got my days mixed up.
Okay, so we're good.
Okay.
Section 4.
Okay.
Okay, section 4, so, this is the separation distance clarification.
Which isn't clarifying to me. I mean, I know what you mean, but.
And the reason I'm open to changing the terminology as it applies, I have no issue with that. The only reason I threw that in there was because we had 3 different terms that were being thrown out. We had source factor thrown out, we had directly, and we had as profile. So this eliminates one of those, and also the word directly can have some ambiguity to it. And also as the crow flies, it's just been the terminology we've been using for 2 years, and that's why I figured that's probably the best way to go about it, but I'm open to.
In a straight line? That's what as the crow flies means, right?
Straight line distance.
Straight line. And I can't tell you how many people I've had 45-minute discussions with explaining as the crow flies. So that term actually, I hate that term, because the general public doesn't understand what that means. I mean,
I'm not sure.
The detours for dump.
As a drone flies?
as the drone flies, yeah. I mean,
It's updated this day.
I just think if we're gonna put a term like this in, then you have to define the term.
Well, I think in
And
Alaska,
that's-
we should say raven.
Yeah, because the raven flies, which.
Being culturally sensitive to Alaska.
Right.
Well,
Makes sense.
so I think it just makes more sense just to say in a straight line. That's just my opinion.
I think that phrase directly instead of crow flies when we were involved with Fry. I was just always nervous crow flies seemed too colloquial, though it makes sense. So I think I was pushing for directly too. It would come from me, but
I
straight
don't,
line is
well,
probably better.
I think as the crow flies, if you define it, if you look it up, I think it's defined as a straight line, right?
Correct, it's not, I think Dean would agree with this too, previous emails, but it's not necessarily a legal term, but it's kind of a generally understood term that it's an aerial straight line distance.
And I personally don't have a problem with directly either, but there might be a legal or a planning reason why I don't use the word directly.
Say direct straight line.
Question is, where do you start that line?
You should just say shortest direct straight line.
That makes sense to me.
Straight
How's
line
it
is
crow
straight
fly? You
line.
had a bunch of
Straight line.
assembly members on the record making comments about crows don't fly straight, crows land on, I mean, you're just gonna get that crap.
Exactly, thank you.
Dean?
Well, you know, I did a Google search as crow flies. It just didn't originate from seeing, you know, crow over the ocean. It would fly straight to land, so direct line, you know. But right, suddenly there are similarity articles, and there's the Alaska Workers' Compensation Board decision that refer to as crow flies. They compare it to pure distance, straight line distance, as opposed to some other distance measurements, such as nearest point on the road system, or you know, where you have a lot of roadways. So there's a whole bunch of other review articles that address FMLA's 75-mile rule. You know, if you have certain employees within 75 miles, that have you measured 75 miles as the crow flies or some other way. So you know, I think it's sort of vague, but if it ever came to an argument, it would be clear what it means. It's a direct line. So, anyways, for our code, that would be a unique feature of our code here, or
No, thank you.
standard legal terms. You know, that's really a features. To me, if it's been working for the planning department and it hasn't been an issue today, then I mean, that's fine with it. If they want to use more clean legal language, it would be like, shortest distance between, you know, the doorway or the lot line to lot line, shortest distance at least X feet. That's something used elsewhere in some codes, so.
How about beeline, we can add these to this stuff.
See that, Beeline.
Okay, any other comments? Brett? Go Brett.
Yeah, I mean, the planning department, just to one, this is already a very complicated section to try and figure out distances, and it's a really important section because it's a non-starter if you don't meet this. And so we just want to make this sort of, this code and all this language accessible to a common person. Someone from the public could read this and understand, oh, they mean, you know, through the air. And so whatever term we use, I'm sure Ryan would be open to it as long as it's something that would be easily understood. He's just, I mean, he doesn't need to make the change here. It's just he sees it as an opportunity to make it clear to the public, which we all want.
I think what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to clean everything up.
Yeah.
And we're not opposed to different language, you know, straight line distance, however, you know, beeline as Dick had mentioned. Whatever you guys decide you want to do, we're just trying to clean it all up so it's consistent.
No, I like the fact that you're trying to find it. I just don't, I don't think it's a common term in the public where when we first started having a discussion, I didn't know what that meant, as the crow flies. I had to actually have somebody define, a lawyer define, I'm like, what does this mean? So I'm looking at it for, you know, a very unambiguous term, just something that the average person could read it and understand what it means without having to go Google it.
Sure. And that might be shortest direct line, as Jana suggested. She made a really good suggestion there, something to consider.
Sure. I can definitely come up with some different proposals.
I do like, I don't know if you guys have an opinion on shortest direct line.
Regardless of terrain, I don't want them to try. We don't have anything in the way, it's just direct line, we use direct line without any deference to height.
Yeah, topography adds distance in terms of the shortest practical pedestrian route.
So in the industry, do you know what crow flies mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what shortest direct line means?
Yeah, we know what that means. You have so much on the record of, you know, the assembly members making jokes about the way crows fly and stuff, so if you ever get into a lawsuit, I mean, not to give you your legal advice, they're gonna pull that test, those statements, and they're gonna use that. So, I mean, it's not gonna make too much sense for you guys down the road, but.
We want to make it super crystal clear so there's no.
Shortest direct line.
Okay, so what do you want to do?
Let him go back to work on it.
Ryan knows. Take the dang crows out. That's all I'm saying. Please.
Okay, and then subsection E(I), adding language for applicants exempted from 2B above. And the reason for that is we have this, we've got subsection B right above it that says additional marijuana establishments shall be separated from schools by at least 500 feet, measured from the lot line to marijuana establishment. And then we also have this requirement where it's stating shall be measured by shortest practical pedestrian route from the main entrance to the lot line of the school. And we were thinking, well, why is there two separate ways to measure to a school? This doesn't make sense. But the only time that this measurement, shortest practical pedestrian route from the main entrance to the lot line of the school would apply would be if somebody had initiated a state application prior to January 1st, 2017 and was exempted from the 500-foot straight line search. This is lot line law. So this just clarifies that for both, future planning staff, clarifies it for members of the public. That's only applicable for that scenario.
What if you just deleted school, closest lot line of a child care center, community center covered a school, the school's up here?
We could, but then the separation distance would revert to main entrance to main entrance for separation distance of school. So this tightens it up, puts a little more buffer space, and makes it consistent with drug-free school zones are measured to the line of the school.
Any thoughts? Okay.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, and the rest of the language is just pulling the use-specific standards, they're putting it into the footnote and table of allowed uses. And then section 5, so what this does is this establishes re-inspection fees for special use permits for marijuana, and also establishes re-inspections for those due to modifications of the licensed premises. And this was it was brought to our attention by code enforcement staff because they're having to go out several times and conduct several re-inspections on facilities because they would get out there and they would find that there was gross deficiencies in how the work was done or whether it wasn't complete or it didn't match the plans that were on hand. And I do have some numbers that were provided to me, and these are approximate from code enforcement staff. But out of the 39 facilities inspected, there's 73 inspections done total. So that's 34 re-inspections conducted where no fee was collected for those re-inspections, and that time was not reimbursed at all. So it's coming straight from the taxpayer. If we were to enact a re-inspection fee, those 34 inspections, it comes at a cost of approximately $1,600 fees that the municipality would have received.
Did you say $1,600 a piece?
No,
Total.
Oh, they said a piece, I was like, wait a minute, that math don't add up. Okay.
No, so the fees that we have here that we're proposing are the same exact fees that you would pay for a re-inspection of a land
For building permit.
or building permit, correct? So these aren't fees that we thought of. They're the fees that are in pre-existing code.
So even at 197 for
Correct.
re-inspection?
Why not
Exactly why it's
200? Why not 195?
So can I speak to that? So Ryan and I discussed this at length, and while we recognize that $197 is probably an odd number, and we probably should make it 200, we wanted to remain consistent with what the building permit inspection fees were. So that's why we're recommending $197. If we ever bring the building permit inspection fees up to 200, then certainly we would change this as well, but that's the reason.
And the question is this 130 per hour, one inspector goes out, what if there's two?
We're just charging for the hour, so normally one inspector would go out. Sometimes there may be a need for two, but the fee's not going to change.
Dean?
Since we're talking about fees, I would recommend that we get some input from OMB budget from standard when we're talking about increasing fees, routing fees, or even get OMB's input on what's impact.
But if C kicks in at 20,000 or something, fairly high. We're talking less than 7 here at this point.
Well, it's small, but OMB oversees all revenues, so for this is additional revenue. Maybe they won't have anything to say.
Okay, so you can do that? Send it to her. Jana, get a couple?
Number 22, the 130 an hour, so the inspection following a modification to a previously approved special land use permit. So we pay the modification fee of $425, or, right, and then we don't get one inspection included in that $425? Is that, am I reading that right?
No, your initial inspection's included.
Well, it says inspection of licensed premises following a modification to a previously approved special land use permit. So how I mean is we submit the modification, we pay the $425, goes to the assembly, they approve it, then we have an inspector come out and then we have to pay another $130. I just wanna know if I'm understanding right.
That's correct, it's written down.
So you get dinged twice.
You can think, yes.
Correct.
So it's really.
And that's how the builders are doing it now?
Do you know, Dave? Marine inspection is always, marine inspection fee, and I have it here, $197 per hour. And then inspections, conducted during normal business hours are $130. Regardless, I don't believe you get a free inspection for the building.
There's no free inspections.
No.
Yeah.
So then this would just be consistent across the municipality?
But for the initial special land use permit, we get the initial inspection for free, so if we're modifying it, paying a fee, that initial inspection after the modification, to make sure the modification is correct, it seems logically that that would be included in the fee.
Well, my question then goes back, to the initial inspection. We're not charging them anything, should we be?
That's probably a good question for,
Probably not the direction
staff.
you wanted to go in, but
No,
since you
but
brought it up.
I didn't bring it up, it's actually just, it seems logical that the initial inspection after we already pay for a modification would be included in the modification fee. Maybe you should just up the
Well,
modification.
what I'm
fee.
asking though is, how do we do it in the building industry? Like, when you go for an initial,
In the building industry, you always pay for an inspection.
You're gonna pay for the inspection.
What about for a special land use or conditional land use for the, upland licenses?
There's no inspection.
There's no inspection.
Any other comments on that? Okay. Section 6.
Section 6, so section 6 mirrors many of the previous amendments. It just adds in old code, so it brings old code modifications consistent with what we're doing here.
But, one comment on that, when we've done this previously, it said, it's just Anchorage Municipal Old Code, put Old Code in there. Just so when we're going through this, it's like, okay, that's fine, because otherwise it looks repetitious, and
Yeah.
not everyone remembers this, and in fact, we've forgotten to do it a couple times, so it's a little bit of a reminder.
Good catch. I'll add in.
Okay, so that's 6. Okay, so you're gonna send it to OMB, and you're gonna rework pro-flies, and,
the variance section.
look at the,
Section 2, number 11, D.
all right, yeah. Okay, you're gonna chew on that for a while. Okay, and then you'll bring it back to us. I don't know that we have to have another meeting on that.
It's actually,
I don't think so. I think those two changes are relatively easy for, the planning department to just hammer out.
That work?
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, something with the, just since the liquor license was brought up. So for the land use permit portion of liquor licenses, there isn't the inspection, but you all see the license as well, and they do go out and inspect for that, and they don't charge for their inspection.
Can you repeat that so that I understand it?
So, for the licensing review portion of liquor licenses, the, land use enforcement does go out and inspect the site, and they don't have a charge for that.
Yeah, this is true. So when we get at City View blast out that there's a license renewal or
Yep.
change of premises or something like that, code abatement still,
Yeah,
if fire is
go
going to
out.
check it out,
Yeah.
and they're not charging for that. They drive out there and inspect.
I believe the fire department has in their fire code fees for inspections and re-inspections, but, they're the only exception in Title 10 that I know of that has that fee schedule. So land use enforcement, code abatement, and all of them go, and they don't charge.
So where I said that there's no inspection for alcohol, that
Not on
wasn't
the-
exactly
not on
correct
the
on the
land use.
licensing side.
Right, correct.
But on the conditional use side or special land use permit for alcohol, there is not, but on the licensing side, there is.
And what we're talking about is, under section 5, we're not talking about licensing, we're talking about, land use permit.
Well, would you say that they're kind of merged when it comes to marijuana, or is it that it's just a little bit different for alcohol?
Yeah, I mean, it's different because we don't have the license for alcohol, so it's kind of new ground with this.
It's just a little bit
But,
different. It's hard to
yeah.
compare apples to apples.
But just throwing that out as, how we've been kind of trying to make liquor and marijuana similar.
Well, and it is challenging because we have special land use permit, and which is different from licensing. And so in this particular section, it's a special land use permit, it's not a license.
Right.
So that's where it comes back to, it is kind of apples and, not really an orange, maybe a pear.
No, that is an accurate statement. Yeah.
But I agree with you, it's a policy decision on how you want to handle something like that, but just so you have that information.
Okay. Any more on that? We got one last thing, and that's Mandy, right? Minor modifications. Oh, sorry. Do we have that here?
I just, one of the last thing on this. I noticed that, we're gonna allow people to manufacture edibles, but, not do other manufacturing like extractions. So we're making an amendment to allow that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've treated,
I'm sorry,
Well, I'm looking at this page here where it
that's
talks
just a
about-
continuation of what we have existing, that we treat a bakery without extraction different from an extraction facility. They're different, and that's what we have now, and he's just carried that forward with these amendments. There's no change.
Okay, so to this point, have we allowed manufacturing or cooking of edibles in B3?
Momo's Bakery, so you can have a standalone bakery in B3, no problems. It's just once you add the extraction, then we say, oh, it needs to be in an industrial district unless it's co-located with retail.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Wait, can you repeat that? Sorry, because I know a good definite clarification of that.
Yeah, if you so manufacturing can be a lot of things. If you just have the cooking facility, just the bakery, but you're not doing any extraction, you're just taking the already extracted oils and adding it to your bakery, then that's allowed in a general commercial district.
D3 alone.
Yeah, it's allowed standalone. It's just once you add the extraction, then it kicks you into this category where you either have to be in an industrial zone or you have to be co-located with retail.
Okay.
Okay, good. And the last piece, do we have a copy of that? I think I read it online. I didn't print it.
I apologize, I'll be a while ago.
Yeah, I believe that the copy I sent Mandy was dated September 16th, which was a while ago. But it was just a quarterly report explaining which minor modifications that included administratively by the planning director. Yeah, I guess the feedback I'd like on that is just whether or not that's the format you'd like to see that in. That's giving you enough information. If you'd like more information, less information, once you take a look at that document.
Can you please bring it back up to me?
Manny, could you with zoning and see, zoning enforcement's having marijuana problems? I'm just saying, we haven't had a report, like, I wanna know if zoning is gone out to do enforcement, since they've issued any enforcement complaints, I'd like to know which businesses we've had problems with.
So you just want any kind of like those violations,
Yeah.
violations?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I got a smell complaint.
Thank you. I know we're really close to the end here, but I wanted to bring this up because the Chugaski River Advisory Board did meet on the sewer AO that's coming forward. I know you got it. Septic, sorry, septic. Did you guys happen to see the Chugaski River Advisory Board?
No.
They were only recommending 3 changes to AO 2017-129. One is short plat subdivisions should be cheaper and have less required submittals than larger subdivisions. It was approved unanimously by the advisory board. The second was restrictions for footings for decks to support placements near septic tanks should be relaxed and should instead require placement to be 2 feet distance away. And then the last one, and that was also unanimous, the last one was the potential requirements for nitrate impacts. It says the potential requirement for nitrate impact analysis if adjacent wells exceed 5 milligrams per liter, that's what it says, should be changed to align with state requirements of 10 for short plats. The vote was 5-1. Many parts of the Chugaski River, they say, have naturally occurring elevated nitrates. And so this was clearly a major concern of the Chugaski River Advisory Board. And I know at their meeting, they did have some septic experts come and help them kind of understand the impact to the Chugaski River area. So I've sent this to Dean. I know Debbie sent it to John too, but I've asked for those 3 amendments to the septic ordinance that we'll be deciding on Tuesday. Just to forewarn you.
Gina, who testified on behalf of septic system experts?
You know, I don't, because I wasn't at the meeting, but I know the municipality was invited by the advisory board to participate. But I can get that information.
Yeah, we've seen that there's different quality of engineers that have produced.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah, I totally know where you're going. And that's why I said, if they were trying to do something, I would say outside of what the state regulations are, I think I'd be more, I would look at it probably differently, but they're not asking to exceed any state regulations, so I think, but I'm actually, before Tuesday, I'll go back and listen to the meeting.
And I think on the 5% for nitrate, that just triggered the advanced system, is that right? Or what was?
And that's a huge cost, actually, because I have an advanced system. I mean, we're talking between maybe an $8,000 system
But that's what that was
and a
triggered.
$20,000 system, and I have the $20,000 system. Which it's a cost that keeps giving.
That's true. Okay, we're kind of past our time here, old business, I don't think we had any. Audience participation, everybody's got about 30 seconds if you want to talk. Gloria? Casey? Okay.
We start at 10 tomorrow morning.
Yeehaw. Yeah.
They added, I was gonna say.
It starts at 10, trust me.
Okay, we adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay,